theyeshiva.net.
We begin Hilchis Tefillah Uberchis Koyanim. This is the second set of halachas in Sefer Ava. After the Rambam finished the 4 prakim of Hilchis Krishma, he now continues with the 15 chapters of the laws of Tefillah, davening, Uberchis Koyanim, and the blessings of the Koyanim. Yesh bichlolon shtei mitzvahs as usual. The Rambam first outlines the mitzvahs that he covers in these halachas. So he says, Yesh bichlolon, within these halachas, we're going to be including shtei mitzvahs aseh, 2 positive commandments. Aleph, lavadas Hashem b'chol yom b'tefillah, to serve Hashem daily through davening, and Beis, levarich Koyanim es Yisrael b'chol yom. The Koyanim should bless the Jewish people daily. Ubir shtei mitzvahs elu b'prakim elu. The elucidation of these 2 mitzvahs, the mitzvah of Tefillah and the mitzvah of Birchas Koyanim on a daily basis, will be elucidated in the subsequent 15 chapters. Perik Rishon Halacha Aleph, says the Rambam, mitzvahs aseh lehispalel b'chol yom. There is a positive commandment in Torah for a Jew to daven every day. Shenemar, what's the source for this? The pasuk says in Parshas Mishpatim, "Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem." You should serve Hashem, your God. But how do you serve Hashem? It says you should serve Hashem. You should do services for Hashem. How do I serve Hashem? Says the Rambam, Mipi Hashmuel Amdu. From the oral tradition they have taught, Sha'avoida zu hi tefillah. This avoida, when it says you should serve Hashem, what does it consist of? It consists of davening. As always, when the Rambam says Mipi Hashmuah, it's referring to the oral tradition that was transmitted from Moshe Rabbeinu to his pupils, and they transmitted it to their pupils, and ultimately it was recorded in Torah Shabbal Peh. So Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem in the text is somewhat ambiguous. Serve Hashem, but how do I serve Hashem? But the Chachamim explained from the oral tradition, the explanation, the commentary that they received all the way back from Moshe Rabbeinu, that this avodah refers to how do you serve Hashem? Through davening. And actually, the Rambam says, we have a source in the text for this, Shenemar. There's another pasuk in Parshas Eikev, the second parasha of Kriya Shema, Ula avdoi b'chol avavchem, and to serve Hashem with all your heart. Amru Chachamim, the Chachamim said, this is a Maseches Tainis, Dav Beis, Eizehi avodah shebalev. Which is the avodah that relates to the heart? When you say serve Hashem b'chol avavchem, with all of your heart, Eizeh avodah shebalev. What is the avodah that relates to the heart? That you could say this is the avodah that you do with the heart and in the heart. As the Yiddish expression, mit the hearts und in the hearts. What type of service do you do in the heart and with the heart? It says, Ula avdoi b'chol avavchem. You're serving him with your heart and inside your heart. What type of avodah is that? Chachamim said there's only one type of avodah that you do with your heart and in your heart, and that is tefillah. So since it says, Ula avdoi b'chol avavchem, this explains what va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem means. You service him, like la avdoi b'chol avavchem, with the service of the heart, which is tefillah. Why doesn't the Rambam just bring the second pasuk as a source? Ula avdoi b'chol avavchem. So the Kesef Mishnah explains, because the second pasuk is not written as a mitzvah. It's written as a story. V'hayim shamaya tishma. If you will listen to me and serve Hashem with all your heart, then Hashem promises rain and other great blessings. So it's written as a story. But Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem is written as a mitzvah. So La'avdei b'chol avavchem simply clarifies and elucidates the meaning of Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem. The one question that remains is the Rambam says mitzvah esei lispalel b'chol yom. It's a mitzvah to daven every day. That doesn't say in the pasuk that it's a mitzvah to do every day. It says Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem. Maybe it's once a week, once a month, once a year. So the Kesef Mishnah says, because this itself is the proof. The Torah doesn't say when. So basically, you could say you should do it once in your entire life, and you did the mitzvah. Once in your life, you should daven, because Mishnah says that would be very, very strange that there should be a mitzvah that you do once in your life. So the question is, how do we deal with this mitzvah? So once a week, once a month, once a year, once 10 years, once 20 years. So basically, the Chachamim understood that the Torah is being ambiguous because the Torah is telling you it's obvious that you should do this on a daily basis, because that's basically the cycle of life. Every day we go to sleep and we get up and we go to sleep again and we get up again. Like every 24 hours is like a new unit. So therefore they understood that it means every day. The Kiryas Sefer by the Mabit, Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbi Yosef Mitrani, who lived in the same generation like the Kesef Mishnah in Tzfas in the 1500s, he explains, and it's quoted in the Lechem Mishnah. He says something very interesting. He says, look at the end of the pasuk. It says, "Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem," and then the pasuk says, "Ubeirach es lachmecha ve'es meimecha." So he will bless your bread and your water. How often do people need to drink water and eat bread? Once a week, once a month, once a year. This is daily. So just like you want him to bless your bread and your water every day, you want the bread and water. So the beginning of the pasuk, "Va'avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem," which is the prerequisite of that, you're davening to Hashem and asking him to bless your bread and water, should be when? Every single day. That's the source, that mitzvahs esei lispalel b'chol yom. What does the word tefillah mean? The Rambam says, Hilchas tefillah, mitzvah saseh lehispala. He's going to be using the phrase tefillah over and over again. So I think it's worthwhile to pause for a moment and ask what the word tefillah means. So we translate it as prayer. But that's not really the definition of the word tefillah. Let's understand the translation of tefillah from the Tanakh perspective. So throughout the Tanakh, we see 3 different meanings for the word tefillah, and each is extremely enlightening to give us context and understanding of what tefillah really means. The first meaning of tefillah in the Tanakh is judgment. We have, for example, in Parshas Mishpatim, Perik Chafal of Pasuk Chabez, V'nosnu b'flilim, or in Shmuel Aleph, Tefillah lo yalekim. Tefillah is judgment. During tefillah, we judge ourselves. We put our souls, our hearts, our conscience under a microscope. It's a time of introspection. And we also ask Hashem to judge us, to look at us and to judge us favorably, so that when I ask Hashem for different requests and I beseech Him for different things I need in my life, I want Hashem to judge me favorably and to entrust me with these gifts and with these blessings and with these resources. That's one meaning of tefillah. There's another concept of tefillah in Tanakh. Yaakov Avinu tells Yosef before he passes away, he says, Ra'oi fanecha loi filalti. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I will ever see you again. Now I see you, and Hashem even showed me your children. So tefillah actually is the concept of anticipation, imagination, filalti. So what is tefillah? Tefillah is my ability, my courage to imagine what my life could be like, to broaden my horizons and to develop a vision and an imagination of what my potentials are, what my life can look like. But there's a third interpretation for tefillah, and that is naftule elokim niftalti, Leah says. Connection, bonding, or we have hatoifel klei cheres. You put together, you connect, you link pieces of earthenware clay. Tefillah means connection, alignment, a relationship. During tefillah, we realign ourselves with ourselves. We realign ourselves with the creator of the world. We realign ourselves with truth, with oneness, with the essence of all reality, with Hashem. So this is tefillah. Tefillah is judgment in the most positive sense of the word, and tefillah is imagination, and tefillah is connection, a relationship. Halacha beis, ve'ein minyan hatfilas min haTorah. In Torah, there's no numbers of how many times to daven. It says serve Hashem. Serve Hashem with your heart, in your heart, on a daily basis, but it doesn't say how many times. Ve'ein mishnah hatfilah zois min haTorah. Nor is there a text for tefillah min haTorah. Ve'ein l'tfilah zman kavua min haTorah. Nor is there a fixed time for davening in Torah. It's not like Kriya Shema where we say b'shach b'cha, b'komecha. When you wake up, we say Kriya Shema has a cutoff time, at least according to many perspectives. But tefillah doesn't have a fixed time in Torah, in the morning, night, middle of the night, middle of the day. There's no fixed time. So we don't have a number of times to daven, like once, twice, 10 times. We don't have a text to daven min Torah, and we don't have a time to daven min Torah. And therefore, and therefore, fascinatingly, all Jews are obligated to daven, including women and slaves, who are exempt from mitzvahs that are time-bound, as explained in Hilchas Kriya Shema Perek Dalet. The Rambam says, not so with tefillah. Tefillah is a mitzvah that is not time-bound. It's a mitzvah that applies every single day, but there's no time for it. You could do it any hour of the day. Not connected by day, it's not connected to day, it's not connected to night, it doesn't have a specific time of the year, and therefore every single Jew, including men and women and avadim, are mechuyev in tefillah. So what is the mitzvah then? There's no text, there's no numbers, and there's no time. Elachiyuv mitzvah zukachel. The Torah obligation of the mitzvah of tefillah goes like this: Sheyei adam mischanen u'mispalel b'chol yom. That a person should beseech and daven, reach out to Hashem every single day, umagit shvacha shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and speak of the praise of Hashem. V'achar kach, and then shayol tzrochav, he asks for his needs, shehu tzarich lahem, those things that he needs in life, bevakasha ubetchina, with a sense of supplication and request. And then and then he presents thanks and gratitude to Hashem for all the goodness that he has given him. And everybody does this according to his or her capacity and skill. Essentially, the Rambam is describing here the core, the skeleton, biblical mitzvah of tefillah that applies to all Jews every single day of the year, 365 times a year. There's no text. There's no time. You could do it by day. you could do it by night. There's no number of how many times you could do it once, you could do it 100 times. But the Rambam does say it consists of 3 things. And these 3 things are worthwhile to meditate, because according to the Rambam, this is actually the essence of tefillah. The first element is establishing a relationship. We spoke about tefillah as a connection, a relationship. The Rambam says, you speak about the praises of Hashem, which really means, what are you talking about? As we see in the davening, what are you talking about? You're talking about the relevance of Hashem. You're talking about the truth of Hashem. You're talking about the reality of Hashem. We establish a relationship with Hashem. I'm with Hashem. I'm in Hashem. I'm part of Hashem. I'm part of God's world. You discover that Hashem is everything. Hashem is the reality of reality. Hashem is the infinite presence that pervades every part of reality, including the core of me. As the Rambam discussed in the beginning of Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, every single reality emerges from His truth. So that's the first thing you establish. You're aligned with Hashem, your alignment. That's the first element of tefillah. The second element of tefillah is, I share with Hashem. I share my vulnerabilities. I share my pain, my stress, my anxiety, my requests, my needs, material, physical, emotional, psychological, social, spiritual, transcendental, familial, etc. And the third component of tefillah is gratitude. I don't take it for granted. I thank Hashem. 3 components of tefillah: the relationship, the vulnerability, and the sharing, and finally, the gratitude, saying thank you. Gimel, im hayir ragil, if a person was accustomed to this was something that was part of his skill, then he would increase his supplication and request to Hashem. If his lips were plugged, which means it was difficult for him to communicate, he would speak to Hashem according to his capacity, and whenever he wanted. Just as this is true with text, one person could speak for a long time, and another person speaks very briefly according to his capacity, whenever he wants. This is also true about the number of tefillahs. How many times? Everybody did it according to his capability. Those who davened once a day and those who davened numerous times. And it's interesting, the Rambam says every person did it according to his capacity, which means essentially a person should be davening all day. When shouldn't you have a relationship with Hashem? Essentially, the Gemara says, a person should daven all day. But the Rambam says every person did it according to his capability. One person had the time to daven once, and another person davened many times a day. He spoke to God many times. And everybody should be davening facing the Beis HaMikdash, wherever B'chol Makom Shiyah, wherever he may be, wherever the person may be in the world, he would face the Beis HaMikdash, or another interpretation in the Rambam is B'chol Makom Shiyah, wherever the Beis HaMikdash was. When the Mishkan was in the desert, they faced the Mishkan in the desert. When the Mishkan was in Shiloh, or in Noiv, or in Gilgal, or in Givon, they faced the Mishkan. And finally, when the Beis HaMikdash moved to Yerushalayim, that became the direction where people davened, V'chein haya davar tamid me Moshe Rabbeinu v'ad Ezra. And this is how it continued, consistently, from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, who of course introduced the mitzvah of tefillah, all the way down till Ezra, which means almost 1,000 years. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who takes the Jews out of Egypt, molds them into a people, gives them the Torah, and 40 years later, Yeshua brings them into Eretz Yisrael. Ezra is the Jew who comes back from the Babylonian exile to rebuild and start the community in Eretz Yisrael with the second Beis HaMikdash. Between Moshe and Ezra is almost a millennium. So the Rambam says for close to 1,000 years, which is a nice chunk of Jewish history, this is how tefillah existed in the Jewish world. Halacha Daled, the Rambam begins to discuss the upheavals that transformed Jewish history and thus transformed also the structure of davening. When the Jews were exiled from Eretz Yisrael in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked one. Nebuchadnezzar is the emperor of Babylonia, present-day Iraq, who comes to Eretz Yisrael and destroys the first Beis HaMikdash and exiles the Jewish people in the year 3,338 since creation in the Jewish calendar, or 586 BCE, or 428 BCE. There's different calculations beyond the realm of this class. But when the Jewish people are exiled in the times of Nebuchadnezzar HaRasha, Nis'arvu beparas v'yavan u'shar ha'umas, they become assimilated, they get mixed up, intermingled with the Persians, with the Greeks, and other nations. And they give birth to children in the nations of the Gentiles. Remember that the Babylonian Empire didn't last for long. And by the time Galus Bavel was over, 70 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, and Cyrus, the king of Persia, gave the Jewish people permission to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Ezra will ultimately come back to Eretz Yisrael, rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. But the Jewish people at this time already were mixed among the other nations, and ultimately they moved to a very far-flung diaspora. So he says they're living among other nations, the Persians, and then later the Greeks. And the children are born in these foreign nations. Just like most American Jews today, what language do they speak? They speak the native language. They speak English. Or French Jews, French, or Russian Jews, Russian. Many of them, maybe most of them, don't know Hebrew. So he says, these children, their language became confused. The language of each of these children became mixed, a hybrid of many languages. Even when he starts communicating verbally, he gets older, he doesn't know how to speak all of his needs. He can't communicate in one uniform language. It's a cholent, it's a mixture of many other languages, which means no language is being employed in a wholesome way, in an integrated way. There's a lot of errors that are creeping in because you can't say a sentence straight. In this language, you did one word from one language, a word from another language. We call it jargon. Shenemar, the Pasuk speaks about this in Nehemiah. Nehemiah Perik Yud Gimel. He speaks about the community that he discovered in Eretz Yisrael after he came back from Bavel, which was assimilated. He says, Ubneim, their children, Chatzi Medaber Ashdodis. Half of them speak the language of Ashdod. Ve'ena Makirim L'daber Yehudis. They don't anymore know the Jewish language. They're basically employing the language of every nation where they have ended up in, or with which they have intermingled. When any one of these children were davening, he doesn't have the proper language to ask Hashem for his yearnings, for his desires, or to utter the praise of Hashem in the holy tongue. You see, the Rambam includes here both elements of tefillah. There's the element of asking your needs. There's also the element of appreciating Hashem's reality, Hashem's intimacy with you, Hashem's truth, Hashem's infinity, Hashem's oneness, appreciating what God means, what godliness means, what truth is. But so whether it's this element of tefillah, nobody can do it in Lashon HaKodesh anymore. Even if they know some words, they had some Jewish education, but actually they're mixing into their tefillah, to their Lashon HaKodesh, many other languages. Since Ezra, when Ezra and his Bezdin, the Sanhedrin, the court of Ezra, which were the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, who revitalized Judaism in the Second Commonwealth and created a renaissance of Yiddishkeit after the return from the Babylonian exile. When they saw what's happening, they stood up, v'tiknu lem shmoine esrei brachas ala seder, and they instituted for Klal Yisrael 18 blessings in a specific order. Shalosh rishonos shvach l'Hashem. The first 3 brachas capture the first component of tefillah, and that is alignment, a relationship. Talking about the meaning of Hashem, the relevance of Hashem, the truth of Hashem, praising Hashem. Shalosh acharonos, the last 3, haidaya, gratitude, thankfulness. Remember the third component of tefillah that the Rambam said before? That is gratitude. That those became embedded in the last 3 blessings. And then you have the middle ones. He says there's 18. So you have 3 in the beginning, where you're talking about Hashem's meaning, the meaning of Hashem, the relevance of Hashem, the praise of Hashem, the truth of Hashem. The last 3 are gratitude, giving thanks, so that's 6, and then you have 12 in the middle. So he says, the middle ones. Now you might ask, why doesn't it say the 12 middle ones? He said the first 3 and the last 3, well, that you could understand on your own, because he already said 18. So he says 3 here, 3 there, so he doesn't have to say the 12 middle ones. Besides the fact, as we will see in chapter 2, there was another blessing that was added much later, so it's really 13 and not 12. But at this point, the 12 middle ones, yesh behen she'elas kol hadvarim, they include the requests of people, the requests that people might have for everything in life. Shehem kemoy avos l'chol cheftzei ish v'ish l'tzarchei hatzibur kulam. These 12 intermediary blessings become like prototypes. Avos means they become like father figures, like paradigms, like prototypes for the desires of every individual, every conceivable legitimate, authentic desire of the human consciousness and the human soul and the human body are represented by these 12 blessings. Individually, and also the needs of the community. There are my needs as an individual, and then there are our needs as a community, as a nation, as a tribe, as a community in our own city, in our own neighborhood, in our own country. So these 12 blessings became really prototypes in which every person will be able to find his or her inner yearnings and pinings as individuals and as part of a family, as part of a collective, as part of a community, as part of a nation, and as part of civilization. What was the point? So that these brachas, these 18 blessings, will be able to be internalized and arranged in the mouth of every single Jew, and they'll be able to learn them quite swiftly. So that the davening of those who did not have the ability to express themselves in an articulate, definitive, elegant way, it will be a wholesome davening, just like the davening of those who speak with elegance and purity, and their language is refined. And because of this, Tiknu kol habrachas vatfilis mesudaris befi kol Yisrael. Ezra and his Bezdin instituted all of these 18 blessings and prayers, organized in the mouth of all of the Jewish people, so that the theme and the context of every bracha will be arranged and organized in the mouth of every individual, including the one who doesn't have the ability to express himself or herself and articulate themselves in clear, refined language. So basically, they gave us the text, they gave us the language in which we can find ourselves, find our souls, our bodies, our needs, our yearnings, our pinings, our requests, our ambitions, our dreams, again, as individuals and as a collective. And again, both when we're addressing the element of tefillah, which is requesting, the element of tefillah, which is gratitude, and the opening of tefillah, the first three blessings, which is alignment, appreciating what Hashem is, His relevance to our life, His infinity, His presence, His intimacy with us, and the fact that we are all essentially part of Hashem's reality. Hey, v'chein tiknu, there's something else they instituted. The first thing they instituted is they gave us a text. Remember, in the time till Ezra, there was no text. Everybody davened according to their own capacity, their own brain, their own soul. It was spontaneous. It was from your heart, from your emotion. You spoke to Hashem. What Ezra and his Bezdin tried to do was not obliterate that personal touch, but rather enshrine the tefillah in this text so that it will be accessible for everybody. But they did something else. Sheyeh minyan ha-tefillas k'minyan ha-karbanos. They also instituted a number of tefillahs. We learned before there were people who davened many times a day, maybe 40 times a day. Maybe they didn't stop davening. There were people who davened once a day, as he said before. Ezra and his Bezdin instituted a number of tefillahs based on what? K'minyan ha-karbanos. This is the beginning of the Beis HaMikdash. So there's going to be karbanos for another few hundred years, matching the numbers of public collective offerings every day. Shtei tefillas b'chol yom keneged shnei midin. Every single day, the Jewish people as a collective brought two offerings, in the morning and in the afternoon. A lamb in the morning, a lamb in the afternoon was called the Karban Tamid, which is the consistent daily offering. There are karbanos that individuals bring periodically, either because of an obligation or because of a voluntary contribution. But this is the Karban Tamid, the consistent daily sacrifice, in the morning and in the afternoon, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, Shabbos, Yom Tov, weekdays, Yom Kippur, no matter when. So they instituted the numbers of tefillahs to match those karbanos. So therefore, there's two tefillahs. And any day when the Jewish people were obligated to bring an extra, an additional carbon, like Shabbos, like Rosh Chodesh, like Yom Tov, tiknu beit tefillah shlishis keneged carbon musaf. Ezra and his Bezdin instituted that day we should communicate to Hashem a third time. There should be a third davening paralleling the Karban Musaf. The prayer that parallels the morning offering is called Tfilas HaShachar, the Tfilah of the morning. Just like Tamid Shel Boker, the second tefillah, which parallels the Karban Tamid in the afternoon, is called Mincha. What's the connection? The first one I understand, it's Shachar. Shachar is morning. Shachar means morning. But what's the connection to Tfilas Mincha? So the answer is, the Ramban says, and the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos alludes to this, the word Mincha comes from the word Menucha, serenity. In other words, it's the time that the sun is about to set and, so to speak, rest. In other words, for us, it's going to be the time of retirement and rest and darkness, because as the sun sets, night will fall upon us, and this is the time when we return from work and we come home and we retire and we relax. So this is Mincha, which is at dusk before the sun sets. And the third tefillah, which we do on Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, whenever there was a Karban Musaf, that tefillah would be called the tefillah of Musaf, which means the additional, the Musaf, Haisafa, the additional tefillah, which parallels the Karban Musaf. Halacha vav. V'chein iskinu she'adam ispalel tefillah achas balayla. They instituted yet another tefillah, and that is one tefillah at night, after nightfall. Because the limbs of the animal that was offered in the afternoon sacrifice would burn on the Mizbeach throughout the night. The pasuk says in the beginning of Parashas Tzav, this oila, this complete offering, would burn on the Mizbeach throughout the night till the morning. In other words, even though they offered it in the afternoon hours before before nightfall, but let's say if the Mizbeach was filled with many sacrifices and offerings and it didn't have time to be consumed earlier during the day, it could burn throughout the entire night. And for this, they instituted a Ma'ariv, Ke'inyan Shenemar. And there's also a source for this. In Tehillim, it says, Erev, Avoiker, B'tzarayim, Asichav, Ema, V'yishma Kaili. David HaMelech says, at night and in the morning and the afternoon, I will speak, I will yearn, and I will let Hashem hear my voice. Tehillim, Kapitel Nun Hey. What do we see from here? We see that the tefillah that David HaMelech speaks, of course, many generations before Ezra, when there's no text of davening, but still, he speaks about 3 times, Erev, Avoiker, V'tzarayim. So the Chachamim follow this pattern of David HaMelech. Ve'ein tefillas arvus chayvek tefillah shachris u'mincha. The tefillah of Ma'ariv, the night davening, is not an obligation like shachris u'mincha, which actually makes a lot of sense, because the first 2 tefillahs correspond to the karbanas themselves that had to be brought during the day, rain or shine, no matter the circumstances. The third tefillah was when the limbs were burned throughout the night, but that didn't even happen every night, because if the Mizbeach was pretty empty, so then it could have been burnt up during the day. So I think it makes very much sense what the Rambam is saying, that this tefillah is not an obligation like the first 2 tefillahs. Fa'afal pikein, na'agu kol Yisrael b'chol makomis m'shveseyam l'spalal arvis v'kiblu atleim ketfilas chayva. Nonetheless, the Jewish people, wherever they lived, cultivated the tradition to daven Ma'ariv, and they accepted it upon themselves as an obligatory tefillah, just like Shachris and Mincha. Zayah. V'chein tiknu tefillah achar, tefillas Mincha, samach l'shkei sacham, b'yamataynes bulvat. The day of a fast, they instituted another tefillah after Mincha, close to sunset, but this is only on a fast day. For example, on Yom Kippur, or other public fast days that they would institute when there were great challenges or calamities. For example, when there was no rain. The Rambam will discuss that later in Hilchos Tainiyos. This is not talking about fast days like Tisha B'Av or Shivasa B'Tammuz, which are basically days when we remember calamities of yore. But here we're talking about fast days like Yom Kippur, which is not to remember a bad thing of the past, or fast days that were designated to create a certain change. So these fast days have a special tefillah, kedei lahoisef tchinu b'kosh b'pnei hatainis. The purpose was to add more supplications and more requests for the fast day. V'zueh tefillah nikras tefillas ne'ilah. Kelaymar. Why is it called ne'ilah? Kelaymar ninalu shari shamayim ba'ad hashemesh v'nistira. As the sun is being eclipsed, the sun will soon set. Ne'ilah is always davened right before close to sunset. So the gates of heaven are closing behind the sun, meaning as the sun eclipses, the gates of heaven are about to close, and this is the special tefillah before sunset and before this great, awesome day will come to an end. Ches, nimtzu. In summation, the tefillah that Ezra and his Bezdin instituted on a daily basis. Number 3, Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha. Night davening, the morning davening, the afternoon davening. On Shabbos, on Yom Tif, and Rosh Chodesh, we have 4. 3 of every day, Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, but we also have Musaf. Ubiyim Kippurim, and Yom Kippur, which is the fast day, Chumash, we have 5. Arba Elu, Tfilas Ne'ilah, the first 4. Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, plus Musaf. But on Yom Kippur, we also have the 5th tefillah, which is Ne'ilah. Tes. Tfilas Elu ein Peichasin men, avo meisifin alein. These tefillahs, 3, 4, or 5, we don't decrease from them, but we could add on them. Just as in the days of yore before Ezra, a person could daven to Hashem how many times he wanted. He could daven once, he could daven 3 times, but he can also daven 45 times. A person, if you want to daven all day, the Rambam says, Pajalista, harashuz biyadeh. This is the natural state of the Jew. The natural organic state of the Jew is to be in an intimate relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom. So the Rambam says you could daven all day. In other words, Ezra and his Bezdin were not trying to obliterate the creativity and the individuality and the relationship that a Jew establishes with the Rebbeinu Shalom. No, they were creating a structure in order to be able to facilitate a beautiful and elegant tefillah for all of Klal Yisrael. But the Rambam says you can add on these tefillahs, and it doesn't only mean I could say my own stuff. I could daven to Hashem at any point of the day and speak to Him in Yiddish, in Hebrew, in English, in any other language I want. But he means something else. Even these tefillahs, you don't decrease from them, but you can add. Remember, tefillah matches karbanos. If a person wants to bring a carbon nedava, I could contribute a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash. I want to bring a carbon to the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's called a nedava, a pledge, a contribution. So the same is true with tefillah. There's a Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, there's a Musaf, there's a Ma'ariv, but I want to bring a new carbon. I bring a carbon nedava, beautiful. You want to add a tefillah. Lefichach tzarich sheyichadesh davar b'chol bracha. But this means, because of this, if you're going to daven another davening with this text, you have to innovate something in every single bracha, because you represent, this brings out the fact that this is an adava, this is a unique individual contribution. Throughout every bracha from the middle brachas, which are the 12 or 13 intermediary brachas, in each one you should add something personal based on the theme of that bracha. If you innovate it even in one bracha of the middle brachas, it's enough in order to emphasize that this is a contribution and it's not an obligation. So for example, if somebody is struggling with health, or a loved one is struggling with health, I can daven a new davening, and in the middle of Rifa'enu, I'm going to pause and I'm going to start talking about this individual who needs health, or Baruch Aleinu, I'm going to talk about prosperity, Parnasa, or Ata Chaynin Ladam Das, I'm going to talk about maybe unique wisdom that I need, unique perspective that I need, unique perception that I need. I need God to open my mind. Hashivenu or Slach Lanu, I may speak about specific transgressions or sins. I want to make amends. Shma Kailenu, you could talk about anything. You could talk about your dentist appointments. You could talk about the stock market. You could talk about your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with yourself, with your children, or anything else going on in any aspect of your life. So the Rambam says in this Tfilas Nedava, you make sure that it's a carbon Nedava, that you're bringing it, and therefore you add either in each bracha, but at least in one bracha, you should add something that is connected to the theme of that bracha. In the first three and last three, you never add anything, nor do you take off. Over there, you don't make a change. In other words, even if you want to daven an extra time Shemini Esrei, say I want to daven a fourth time, so I could daven, the Rambam says it's not a problem. And one of the middle brachas, I have to add something personal in any one of the brachas connected to the theme of that bracha, whereas the Poskim say in Shema Kailenu, you could talk about anything, but the first three and the last three, they remain, so to speak, immutable. And I find this to be extremely symbolic, because what do the first three brachas represent? As I said before, the first element of tefillah, there's alignment, there's a relationship, and that never changes. The first three are the bedrock of tefillah. There's always a relationship with Hashem. Hashem is always in your life. He's always connected to you. He always wants to be connected to you. He always wants to hear you. He always loves you. You're always part of Him. That doesn't change. The last three are what? Gratitude. There's always gratitude, not taking life and gifts for granted. That doesn't change. The middle blessings always changes. My needs as a 10-year-old were not my needs as a 20-year-old. My emotional needs as a 20-year-old were very different than my emotional needs as a 40-year-old, The vicissitudes of life, the fluctuations of life. Some days we're on flying high, and some days we feel like we're in the abyss. Some days we feel that certain things are so important, but a year later, as you heal a little bit and you realize, oh my God, and that's really what I wanted a year ago. What was I thinking? So the intermediary blessings, by definition, are relatable to the unique state where every person is. So which is, by the way, this gives us perspective on the concept of the fixed texts of Ezra. My hunch would be that the Rambam is not only referring to articulating the tefillas in an elegant way and saying that the Jews didn't have a good Hebrew anymore, so they were making a cholent from languages, and God gets headaches. He wants to have nice diction and good grammar and a clear speech. He likes when words are articulated and definitive, and if you're sticking to a language. I don't know if the Rambam is only referring to that. He may also be referring to the idea that there's elegance in language and there's also elegance in themes. I can be a 19-year-old young man, and my mind is now completely. I remember I was in yeshiva once. I was teaching in a yeshiva, and there was a boy there, very bright kid, deep, fine person, a really good quality, high quality person. And he developed this crush on somebody, this crush on this girl, and he just couldn't get out of his head. He stopped learning, he stopped davening. It occupied him 24 hours a day. And I remember I was thinking to myself, if I can help him forward the tape recorder of his life 3 years from now, he will see this is irrelevant. He doesn't need it. He doesn't want it. She doesn't need it. She doesn't want it. But now, this is all he's thinking about. There's nothing else in his life. If God would ask him, name your wish, this would be his wish. His wish would just be that he could run away with her to New Zealand for the next 35 years. Sometimes I am in this state. That's where I am. I'm drunk. Sometimes I'm drunk with something very positive, and sometimes I'm drunk with a crush that is filling a void, and maybe in a year from now I'm going to sober up. So the point is, whenever you allow people to daven on their own, which is amazing and incredible, but ultimately there's an immaturity there. There's something, the Rambam calls it an ileg. I don't think he's only talking about language. I think he's also talking about the soul, the message. The the message is often very, very immature. It's underdeveloped because it's based on my consciousness right now. And when my horizons expand, and when I become a little healthier, and I become a little more mature, everything changes, which is not a problem. When I'm 19, I daven for those things when I'm 19. When I'm 12, I daven for what things. When I'm 9, it's 9. And when I'm 6 and 6. And when I'm 48 or 58 or 78, I daven for other things. That's perfectly fine. But the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah gave us a gift. They gave us a text of davening that applies to every single soul, in every milieu, in every situation. In other words, they capture the transcendent and most authentic yearnings of the soul and the mind and the body that will ultimately be applicable to every single stage of your life. And when you delve deep into the text, you will find yourself there. You will find your truest self in that text. Now, you want to add on that, Gesund Tehet, the Rambam says. You want to do the tefillah again, Gesund Tehet. But you have to add something personal in some of these brachas. Yud, the last halacha. Ein hatzibur mispalel in tefillas nedava. The tzibur does not daven at tefillas nedava. In other words, we don't do b'tzibur communal additional prayer. L'fishein hatzibur mevi in carbon nedava. Because a carbon nedava can only be done by an individual, not by a community. By definition, all the karbanas that come from the tzibur are obligatory. An individual, there's obligatory karbanas, and there are voluntary karbanas as a contribution. So, and as an individual, I can bring a carbon nedava. Now, this represents what a tefillas nedava means. It's about my own individual gift and creativity. When it comes to musaf, though, even individuals shouldn't do two musafs. You know why? One has an obligation and one has a contribution. Because again, carbon musaf, there's no such a thing as an adava. Carbon musaf, by definition, was a public communal offering that was brought in honor of a day. Shabbos, Yom Tov. There was no carbon adava musaf. An individual carbon can be a carbon adava. So therefore, as an individual, I can do an extra shachris, an extra mincha, an extra ma'ariv, gesund tehet. Not an extra musaf, and as a community, there's no extra shachris, mincha, or ma'ariv. V'yeshmin hagoyinim mishayir. However, there were the goyinim who gave a different directive. They said, Sha'asr l'spalot tefillas nedava b'shabbos v'yamim tovim. They went a step further and they said, even an individual, you cannot add another tefillah as a contribution on Shabbos or Yom Tov, even if it's not musaf, shachris, mincha, ma'ariv, v'shein makrivin b'am nedava l'chayvas hayom b'lvad. Because on Shabbos, you're not allowed to offer a personal contribution to the Beis HaMikdash. Remember that offering sacrificing an animal in the Beis HaMikdash and putting it in the flames was a violation of Shabbos. So if you're obligated to bring the carbon on Shabbos, then the Torah says you're allowed to. It's not a problem. As the Gemara discusses in Psachim and other places, they would offer the carbon tamid on Shabbos. They would offer the carbon Pesach on Shabbos if Erev Pesach was on Shabbos. Because over there the Torah gives you an obligation to bring these karbanos. But if I made a contribution, a pledge, that I'm going to bring this sheep or this meal offering as a carbon, do it on Sunday. What do you have to do it on Shabbos? You're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. So there's no carbon adava even as an individual on Shabbos. So the Goyinim say, therefore, you cannot daven an individual tefillas nedava on Shabbos only during the weekdays. This is the shit of the Goyinim that the Rambam quotes. I guess it's appropriate here to quote the Rosh. The Rosh in his Chuvas Klal Daled writes that if you're going to do a tefillas nedava, whether on Shabbos, like the first view of the Rambam, or the other days of the week, he says, just make sure that you know yourself, that you'll really be able to have kavanah from the beginning of the Shmoneh Esrei till the end. He says, because if not, if you're going to start a new Shmoneh Esrei, and you're going to start daydreaming about your dentist appointments, and about your business deals, and about other issues stressing you out, he says, what's the point? Lama li rov zev chechem. Halavai, people would focus their minds and attentions and meditations to the three davenings of every day. There's no need to add tefillas unless you really know that your mental space is going to be focused in the appropriate fashion. Of course, this is talking about all adding another tefillah, which means doing Shmoneh Esrei a fourth time, a fifth time, a sixth time. Just davening to Hashem in the middle of the day with your own language, with your own words from your own heart, then obviously that is never a problem and you can always do it. And remember, that is always a fulfillment of the mitzvah's essay of davening, because that's how essentially they davened for the first 1,000 years of Jewish history. So at any point of the day, it seems from the Rambam, if you start speaking to Hashem, you praise Hashem, you thank Hashem, thank you Hashem, you speak about your needs, you're fulfilling a mitzvah's essay in Torah, and in that there's no limit. You're not saying Hashem's name, you're not saying these 18 brachas, and of course you don't have to therefore add anything to any bracha, and this is not connected whether it's Shabbos or Yom Tov.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.